Hello dear students, I am Dr. Venkateshwari, Assistant Professor of English, Sita Lakshmi Ramaswamy College, Trichy. My presentation will focus on the basic introduction of the metaphysical poetry and its features. In this video, we are going to discuss on the introduction of the metaphysical poetry. What does the term metaphysical mean? Characteristics of the metaphysical poetry, some of the predominant metaphysical poets, and the conclusion. English metaphysical poetry is the richest and most widely ranging in the language. When the style was most vigorous in the 17th century, it brought forth the best erotic poetry and the best devotional poetry, as well as the finest lyric satires, pastorals, and visionary meditations. According to Grierson, metaphysical poetry in the full sense of the term is a poetry which has been inspired by a philosophical conception of the universe and of the role assigned to the human spirit in the great drama of existence. It was John Dryden who employed the term metaphysics in connection with Donne. In a course concerning the original and progressive of satire which got published in the year 1693, he said of Donne that he affects the metaphysics not only in his satires but in his amorous verses where nature only should reign and perplexes the minds of their fair sex with speculations of philosophy when he should engage their hearts and entertain them with the softness of love. But he was not suggesting it as a definitive description of a style of writing or of a school of poets. It was Dr. Johnson who did that. In his Life of Cowley, Johnson stated that about the beginning of the 17th century, there appeared a new race of writers that may be termed the metaphysical poets. John Bennett, a modern critic, does not feel happy about the term metaphysics since it gives the impression that metaphysical poetry discusses the nature of the universe. He points out that the word metaphysical refers to the style rather than subject matter, and the style reflects an attitude towards experience. Undoubtedly, a term was needed to describe the poetry of Donne and his followers from the beginning. Let us see some of the characteristics of the metaphysical poetry. Concentration is one of the major features of the metaphysical poetry. A metaphysical poem tends to be short and it is always closely woven, and so there is some truth when it is said a metaphysical poem is an expanded epigram. The reader is held to an idea or a line or argument. He is not allowed to pause and ponder over a passage. Metaphysical poetry demands that we pay attention and read on. Metaphysical conceit. A striking characteristic of metaphysical poetry is its fondness for conceits. A conceit is a comparison whose ingenuity is more striking than its justness. All comparisons discover likeness in things, unlike a comparison becomes a conceit. Elizabethan poetry teems with conceits. They are used as ornaments. It is mostly used to persuade, or it is used to define or to prove a point. An excellent example of a conceit is to be found in the poem A Valediction Forbidding Mourning, where a pair of lovers are compared to a pair of compasses. By using the analogy of the compass, at the time of his bidding farewell, the poet persuades his wife not to be mournful. The lines in the poem illustrate the argumentative and persuasive qualities we meet with in metaphysical poetry. Learnedness. The metaphysical poets were men of learning and their poems are laden with scholarship. Being learned, they tried to be singular and novel in their thoughts. As Johnson rightly commented, they wanted to say what they hoped had been never said before. That is why they ransacked nature and art for illustrations, comparisons, and allusions. They did not follow the trodden path. They had their own thoughts and they worked out a new way to give expressions to their thoughts. And the next important features of the metaphysical poetry is mechanism of sensibility and the unification of sensibility. The wide learning of the metaphysical poets had become a part of their poetic sensibility, and it proved itself to be of utmost value to them in discovering analogy in the midst of the most diverse kinds of experience. Eliot goes on to say that the poets of 17th century possessed a mechanism of sensibility which could devour any kind of experience. Unification of sensibility, the most striking characteristics of the metaphysical poets, it is their possession of what T.S. Eliot calls the unification of sensibility. The phrase denotes the fusion of thought and emotion. Donne's poem Song is a clear illustration and unified sensibility. We shall now pass on to the next characteristics of the metaphysical poetry, cynicism. Cynicism is a quality that stands out prominently in the erotic verse of the metaphysicals. It was a fashion to write love poems in the manner of Petrarch, idealizing the lady and falsifying the poet. Donne's age saw an immense development of the drama, and Donne himself was a frequenter to plays. Like him, his followers also possessed a strong dramatic imagination. Many of these poems of his metaphysicals open in an abrupt manner, thereby arresting the attention of the readers from the very outset. Hence, there were unconventional openings while writing verses. Compared with the mellifluous poetry of the Elizabethans, the verse of the metaphysical appears to be harsh and staccato. Harshness is an integral part of the poetry of the metaphysicals. In this slide, we shall see some of the predominant metaphysical poets. John Donne. John Donne, he is considered as the undisputed leader of the metaphysical poets. He was influenced by the followers to a greater extent, the best pupils in the school of Donne, and he learned from their master how to speak their own minds and in their own voices. Next is George Herbert. He was a model of a man, a gentleman, and a clergyman. Herbert's poetry is simpler than Donne's. Herbert's narrower experience not only limits his choice of subject matter, but simplifies the texture of his poems. Henry Waugh. Personal misfortune, the civil trouble of the time, and the influence of his mystical brother Thomas all helped to turn Waugh to a poetry of religious contemplation. Andrew Marvell comes next in this line. Of all the metaphysical poets, not excluding Donne, Marvell wrote on the greatest variety of subjects. He wrote on the great country houses where he was employed and of the political events of his day. He wrote of love and religion also. Richard Crawshaw was the next. Perhaps Crawshaw has been considered as a metaphysical poet mainly because of the conceits and paradoxes in which his work abounds. Abram Cowley wrote love poems in acknowledgement of Donne's supremacy as a poet of love and often seemed to follow him. Conclusion. The revival of interest in the poetry of Donne and his followers has been regarded as one of the most significant features of the modern English poetry. This revival of interest is not the result of a shifting literary taste, but a deep-rooted similarity between the age of Donne and of our own age. The experience of flux and transition in the present century seems to have given us an understanding denied to the 18th century, to the Victorians, and even to the Romantics. To those poets of our times who have struggled to bring poetry back into relation with the widest possible range of experience and to fuse thoughts and feelings in one act of imaginative apprehension, Donne and his followers have seemed to be particularly relevant. So students, in this video, we have seen on the introduction of the metaphysical poets, the term metaphysical, some of the characteristic features of the metaphysical poetry, some evident predominant metaphysical poets, and the conclusion. I hope that this video is useful. Let us meet in the next video. Thank you.